In the heart of imperial Rome, where the roar of lions echoed through the Colosseum and Christians were hunted for their faith, one man rose from the depths of slavery to the highest seat of the church, a slave, a convict, and yet a pope. This is the incredible story of St. Callistus I, the man who built the catacombs that sheltered persecuted Christians, redefined mercy within the church, and died for the faith he once seemed too unworthy to lead. But his journey to sainthood began not in glory, but in disgrace. Callistus was born a slave in Rome around the year 155 AD, in an age when the Roman Empire worshipped its emperors and despised the growing sect called Christians. His master, a wealthy Christian named Carmelite, saw potential in the young slave and entrusted him with money to manage a small bank, a risky venture in the empire's bustling capital. But tragedy struck. The business failed, and Callistus lost everything. Desperate to recover the funds, he fled, was caught, and thrown into prison. From the shadows of the cell, he could have vanished into history, yet fate, or divine providence, had other plans. After his release, Callistus found himself again in trouble when a dispute in a synagogue turned violent. He was accused of disturbing the peace and condemned to the mines of Sardinia, a living hell where few ever returned. There, in the choking dust of the mines, Callistus encountered the suffering Christ, not in visions, but in the eyes of fellow Christians dying beside him. It was Pope Victor I who first heard of the prisoners in Sardinia, but it was the emperor's mistress, Marcia, secretly sympathetic to Christians, who arranged their release. Among the survivors was Callistus, frail, scarred, but alive. He was sent to Anzio, granted a small pension, and quietly faded from sight. Yet God was not done. Under Pope Zephyrinus, Callistus was recalled to Rome. Recognizing his intelligence and faith, Zephyrinus appointed him deacon and superintendent of the catacombs, the very tunnels where persecuted Christians buried their dead and gathered in secret worship. Here, Callistus's true mission began. He organized burial spaces for martyrs, offered care for the poor, and safeguarded the memory of those who died for Christ. The vast network he helped oversee would later bear his name, the Catacombs of St. Callistus, a sacred ground where popes and saints would rest for centuries. But not everyone saw him as a hero. His past still haunted him, and soon his future would divide the church itself. When Pope Zephyrinus died around 217 AD, Callistus was elected the 16th Pope of Rome. His election angered many, especially the rigid theologian Hippolytus, who accused him of heresy and moral weakness. Why? Because Callistus dared to preach forgiveness, even for the gravest sinners. He proclaimed that the church could absolve not only murderers and adulterers, but even those who had denied the faith during persecution. To Callistus, no sin was greater than God's mercy. He understood the brokenness of humanity. He had lived it himself. His vision of a merciful church clashed with the strict legalism of his opponents. Hippolytus broke away, becoming the first known anti-pope in history. But Callistus stood firm. The church, he said, is not a community of the pure, but a refuge for sinners. That message, radical for its time, would echo through the centuries, inspiring later popes from St. Peter to Pope Francis, who called the church a field hospital for souls. In 222 AD, persecution returned under Emperor Alexander Severus. The questions of Rome once again faced arrest, torture, and death. Pope Callistus was targeted for his faith and influence. According to ancient accounts, he was seized by a mob and thrown into a deep pit, perhaps a well, dying as a martyr for Christ. His body was recovered by the faithful and buried in the catacombs of Callistus along the Appian Way. From slave to banker, from convict to pope, Callistus's life is a testimony to redemption. He proved that God's grace transforms weakness into strength, sin into sanctity, and shame into glory. Today, St. Callistus I is honored as pope and martyr, his feast celebrated on October 14th. He reminds us that the church is not a museum of saints, but a hospital for sinners. From the mines of Sardinia to the chair of Peter, Callistus's story is the gospel in motion, the victory of mercy over judgment, of hope over despair, and of love over all. And so we remember him, not just as a pope, but as a man who believed that even the fallen can rise again in Christ.
A young nun lies gravely ill. For days, she hovers between life and death. Suddenly, she opens her eyes. "I saw an angel beside me," she would later write, "holding a golden spear, and he pierced my heart." This was not fantasy. It was a moment that would shape one of the greatest mystics in history. This is the story of St. Teresa of Jesus, the fiery Spanish reformer, doctor of the Church, and a soul consumed by divine love. Teresa de Cepeda de Ahumada was born in Avila, Spain in 1515 into a noble family living in a time of discovery, reform, and spiritual turmoil. As a child, Teresa was fascinated by stories of saints and martyrs. One day, she tried to run away with her brother Rodrigo. They wanted to be beheaded by the Moors so they could see God sooner. Their uncle found them at the city gate. That zeal, that burning desire to give everything to God, would never leave her. But adolescence brought distraction. After her mother's death, Teresa fell into the world of romance novels and vanity. Her father, worried, sent her to a convent school, a decision that would change her life forever. Teresa entered the Carmelite convent of the Incarnation at age 20. But religious life wasn't easy. The convent was relaxed, too many visitors, too much comfort, too little silence. Soon after taking her vows, she fell gravely ill. Paralyzed and unconscious for days, she was thought dead and even prepared for burial. But she survived, weak but transformed. Over the next 20 years, she struggled, torn between love for God and the distractions of the world. She prayed little, doubted herself, and felt far from holiness. Then one day, before a statue of the scourged Christ, she broke down weeping. "Lord," she said, "I will not rise until you grant what I ask, to be truly yours." That moment marked the beginning of her mystical journey. Teresa began experiencing profound mystical graces, levitations, visions of Christ, and a burning union with God. Her famous transverberation, where an angel pierced her heart with a golden dart, became one of the most iconic moments in Christian mysticism. But these experiences came with trials. Some priests accused her of delusion, others of pride. The Inquisition watched her carefully. Yet, guided by confessors like St. Peter of Alcantara and St. John of the Cross, Teresa remained steadfast. Her writings, the life, the interior castle, and the way of perfection revealed a path of prayer so clear and profound that they would become spiritual treasures for centuries. Teresa's visions inspired her to restore the Carmelite order to its original poverty and simplicity. In 1562, against fierce opposition, she founded the first Reformed convent, St. Joseph's in Avila, where the nuns lived in strict enclosure, silence, and deep prayer. Her reform spread rapidly. She founded 17 convents and inspired the reform of the male branch with St. John of the Cross. The discalced Carmelites, barefoot, humble, devoted, would rekindle the fire of contemplative life across Europe. Yet each foundation was a battle: opposition from within the order, scrutiny from the church, physical exhaustion, and constant travel. But Teresa's courage was unshakable. "God alone suffices," she wrote. "Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things are passing. God never changes."